The sun was setting behind the tall acacia trees along the horizon, casting long shadows across the golden grasslands of the Serengeti. A lone young lion, barely more than a cub, stumbled through the tall grass, his stomach growling with hunger. His name was Jabali, which meant the hyena in Swahili. His mother had given him this name because he was born with a distinctive black mane around his neck that reminded her of the hyenas they often fought with. But right now, Jabali wasn't thinking about his name or his mother. He was too busy trying to find food and survive. Jabali had been kicked out of his pride a few days ago by his own father. It was a brutal and humiliating ouster that left him alone and desperate in the vast wilderness of the Serengeti. The pride had been struggling to find prey, and his father, the big male, had grown impatient with Jabali's lack of hunting skills. During a rare sighting, he had snapped at Jabali, accusing him of being useless. And when Jabali had retaliated, his father had given him a swift kick that sent him sprawling. "Get out!" his father had growled. "You are no longer welcome here." And so Jabali had done as he was told, wandering away from the only home he had ever known. Now, 3 days later, his legs were aching from walking and his belly was rumbling with hunger. He hadn't eaten since his mother had managed to catch a small antelope shortly before leaving the pride. And even that hadn't been enough to satisfy the pride, much less to fill up Jabali's empty stomach. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, panic began to set in. Jabali knew that if he didn't find food soon, he would die. Suddenly, he caught the scent of something in the air, a delicious, mouth-watering smell that made his stomach growl louder than ever. He followed the scent until he came across a small herd of impala grazing peacefully in a clearing. Jabali's mouth watered. This could be his chance to get the food he needed to survive. But he knew that the impala were fast and agile, and attempting to hunt them would be no easy feat. Still, hunger drove him forward. As he crept closer to the impala, adrenaline coursing through his veins, he could hear their soft snorts and the rustling of their coats as they grazed. The smell of their musk filled his nostrils, making his mouth water even more. Jabali had hunted impala before with his pride, but those were different times. Back then, he'd had the support of his pride, the backup of his siblings, and the guidance of his mother. But now he was alone, and the thought of taking down such a nimble prey on his own seemed almost impossible. He considered turning back, but the thought of going hungry for another night drove him to keep going. Jabali knew he needed a plan. The impala were too quick for a direct assault, so he needed to be smart. Using his mother's teachings and his knowledge of the land, he decided to try a tactic they used during the dry season when the prey was scarce. He would use the terrain to his advantage, hiding and waiting until the perfect moment to strike. Jabali circled the impala, keeping a safe distance and staying hidden behind the tall grasses. He watched them graze, noting their patterns and movements. The plan was risky, but it was his best chance. He just needed to be patient and wait for the right moment. As the sun began its final descent, Jabali found a spot about 50 meters from the impala. It was close enough to launch a surprise attack, yet far enough to avoid being seen. He lay down in the tall grass, his heart pounding in his chest. Time seemed to slow down as he waited. The impala grazed calmly, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Jabali's eyes never left them. He tensed every muscle, ready to spring into action. Suddenly, one of the impala lifted its head and sniffed the air. It snorted, and the rest of the herd followed its gaze, but they didn't seem to see anything. They went back to grazing. Jabali's heart sank. Had he been discovered? Maybe the impala could sense danger, or maybe they just weren't interested in him. He debated whether to abandon the hunt, but his hunger pangs made him stay put. Just a little longer, he thought, just in case. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through the tall grasses, an impala wandered away from the herd. It was a young male, smaller than the others, and he seemed curious rather than fearful. Jabali's ears perked up. This was his chance. With a burst of speed, Jabali launched himself out of his hiding spot. The young impala saw him coming and tried to flee, but it was too late. Jabali tackled him to the ground, pinning him down with his weight. The impala struggled, kicking and biting, but Jabali held on tight. He had never felt such a rush of excitement and fear at the same time. The other impala watched, alarmed, but none dared to come to the rescue. Jabali could feel his prey's heart beating beneath his paws, the lifeblood pumping through his veins. It was a primal, instinctive dance, a battle of wills that had been played out countless times in the history of the savanna. Jabali knew that this moment would determine his fate, whether he would live to hunt another day or become just another casualty of the endless struggle for survival. As the last rays of daylight faded away, Jabali's grip tightened. This was it. He could end the struggle now, end the impala's suffering. But he also knew that this meal would sustain him for days. He needed to keep the impala alive. Slowly, carefully, he began to drag his kill away from the rest of the herd. The impala, dazed and injured, let him lead it deeper into the tall grass, further away from the safety of its companions. It was a difficult journey, but Jabali was driven by the promise of food. Finally, when he was sure he was far enough away, he stopped and turned to face his captive. The impala was trembling, its eyes wide with fear and pain. Jabali hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do next. He had never killed an animal this big and this strong on his own. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the pounding of his heart. Slowly, he began to eat, tearing chunks of meat from the impala's body and swallowing them whole. The taste was like nothing he had ever experienced before, a rich, savory flavor that seemed to fill every part of his being. He ate until his hunger was sated and his belly was full. As the moon rose high in the sky, Jabali looked down at the remains of his kill. There was still plenty of meat left over, enough to last him several days. He marked the spot where he had made his kill and dragged some of the meat back to his hiding place. Then, feeling tired and content, he curled up in the tall grass and fell into a deep sleep. In the morning, Jabali awoke to the sound of birds chirping and the distant roar of a lion pride. He stretched and yawned, feeling the strength returning to his limbs. The taste of the impala still lingered in his mouth, a reminder of his hard-earned victory. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jabali left his hiding place and began to explore his surroundings. He walked with a newfound confidence, his head held high. No longer was he the scared and desperate cub who had stumbled into the plain the day before. He was Jabali the hunter, the slayer of impala. Yet as the hours passed and he saw no other prey, a new feeling of hunger began to stir within him. The thrill of the hunt was over. Now it was time to face the reality of his situation. Jabali had survived the night and defeated an impala, but he was still alone. He was still just a young lion with no pride, no family, and very little hope. The vastness of the savanna stretched out before him, a harsh and unforgiving landscape where only the strong survived. And Jabali, despite his recent victory, felt anything but strong. He was tired, hungry, and afraid, and he knew that if he didn't find help soon, he would die. The sun beat down on his back as he walked, and each step was a reminder of his desperate situation. The tall grasses whispered in the wind, and Jabali imagined that they were mocking him, laughing at his weakness. He wanted to give up, to lie down in the shade and wait for the end. But something inside him, some instinctual spark, kept him moving. And so he walked on, stumbling through the tall grass, a lone lion cub in search of a new pride, a new family, a new life. If you want to hear more content like this, please subscribe for more. And thank you so much for watching.